In 1942, Fred and Eugenia Oster purchased 1,400 acres of mountainous land in Cloverdale, a small town an hour and a half north of the Golden Gate. After they drove out of town along the banks of the Russian River, they began to climb the steep dirt roads of their new ranch. They passed an old church and several houses until finally an ornate mansion came into view at the top of the hill. When they opened the door, they found themselves surrounded by all the relics of the previous residents' life. Dresses were hanging in the closets, books were lining the shelves. Walking through the many rooms, they found Victorian furnishings and imported tiles. And there were boxes and boxes of letters and documents belonging to Hartwell and Madame Emily Preston. It was almost as if nothing had been touched for years, left intact as some sort of shrine. Part of the history of Sonoma County can still be seen in the remnants of the Preston Ranch in Northern California. Emily Preston's life was a reflection of the conditions which formed the social and religious trends of the time. For 34 years she reigned like an empress over her small community. Her personal religion became the focal point of the lives of her followers, and her medical practice attracted the attention of people throughout the state and beyond.
Madam Preston had what many people believe was a utopian community by fact and not design. The people here were very happy. They all played music. They all worked hard. They worked up a sweat. They came here to be healed.
In 1898, the San Francisco Chronicle devoted an entire page to her activities.
Is there anyone who will credit that somewhere in the world there is a woman who not only owns a town site, but runs every enterprise of importance in it, who is mayor and council, and school board and preacher, who is their medical advisor and cemetery association, and their spiritual guide, who develops their aesthetic tastes, who superintends the construction of houses, and plans all their amusements and recreations? She has been found in California, and as a matter of course, she could scarcely exist elsewhere.
San Francisco and North Pacific Railroad provided the first extensive standard gauge rail service to Sonoma County and became the southern end of the Northwestern Pacific Railroad. Construction began from Petaluma northward in 1869. Service was extended north to Santa Rosa by 1870, and in 1872 the railway terminated in the town of Cloverdale. Cloverdale became the hub of this northern terminus and was the starting point for several stage lines, one leading to the famed Geysers Hot Springs, another over mountains and up into Lake County, and yet another running along the banks of the Russian River up to Ukiah. But many people also would find their way north along the river to the town of Preston, hoping to visit with the Madam herself, known also as Emily Preston. Emily began her life in Schoharie County in upstate New York, born into the Lathrop family on January 1st, 1819. Although this date would contradict her marriage and death certificates, as well as several newspaper articles. She also listed her birthplace as Connecticut and Michigan, and her birth year ranges from 1818 to 1832. New York State at that time was a hotbed of religious fervor, the so-called burned-over district, stretching from Albany to Buffalo. It was the Mount Sinai of American mysticism, giving birth to new religions such as Mormonism and Seventh-day Adventism, and also the spread of spiritualism, mesmerism, seances, and other occult sensations, many of which mirrored and aided the rise of suffragism and other progressive movements. The nation's occult center gave women their first opportunity to openly serve as religious leaders, in this case as spirit mediums, seers, and channelers. In 1860, after the death of her first husband, Emily journeyed west with her children to California. It was during this time that she would have visions which would change the course of her life.
In the middle time of my life, I was in deep affliction and humiliation, so deep that I felt myself utterly deserted by all human sympathy. In the midst of this sorrow, I cried to God for help, and in the midst of my agony, in my room at night, I suddenly found the room light, and saw great golden letters of light spelling words of consolation and assurance that God heard and would protect me. I afterwards found that this sight was the result of the removal of a veil or something from the front of my eyes which enabled me to read, in my real normal state, the open book of life. The words of God which fill the universe to be seen by all who have eyes to see them. Besides the words of written language, I see infinite varieties of photographs representing, as I am told and believe, the real realities of things in the universe, heaven, earth, and hell. And it is by this photography that I am enabled to diagnosticate cases at a distance. I have been instructed in the art of reading the rapidly moving lines that pass before my eyes from right to left, and the power the man who orders this work says in these word-embodied messages, "I am God."
Emily did not claim to be a physician. She did claim a knowledge of folk-type medicine practices, combined this with recipes for her particular panaceas, and entered the San Francisco healing scene. She claimed possession of an intelligence, an inspired thought process directly connected with God. This supposedly allowed her to penetrate the human body by sight alone and describe and diagnose cases. In the world of 19th century medicine, mind cures claimed by magnetic healers and the insights offered by clairvoyants were accepted methods among many for setting things right. What distinguished Emily from her peers was her belief that God, and God alone, controlled the talent within her. By the 1870s, many people were desperate to escape the polluted industrial cities and factories of the East Coast. Physicians frequently prescribed travel to their patients to alleviate illnesses they could not diagnose. Climate and mental attitude were believed to greatly influence health. As a result, many patients journeyed west to seek a cure for everything from tuberculosis to rheumatism. People looked for health benefits in both the dry heat of Southern California and the hot springs and fresh mountain air of Northern California. In 1874, Hartwell Lytton Preston, a lawyer and a Harvard graduate, attended one of Emily's lectures of divine messages. 1 year after they met, on May 27, 1875, Hartwell and Emily were married in Oakland. Born June 20, 1821, on a small farm near Lynchburg, Virginia, Hartwell was the 9th child in a family of 16. His parents were anti-slavery Quakers. He came to California in 1849 and spent the succeeding 20 years practicing law, fighting alongside abolitionists for California to be a free state, and mining in Oregon and the Idaho Territory. In 1870, Hartwell Preston had bought a vineyard and stock ranch on the outskirts of Cloverdale at the northern edge of Sonoma County. Aspiring to be a gentleman farmer, he planted fruit trees and built a simple one-story gabled cottage on the side of Oak Mountain overlooking the Russian River. The land boasted of a 10-acre lake towards the northern end of the estate, numerous springs and streams, giant manzanitas and oak trees, and towering eucalyptus. In 1875, an 18-room Italianate two-story mansion was built. The Russian River flag on September 23rd of that year described his holdings.
Riding out into the country, we cross a well-built covered bridge spanning the Russian River. Near the bridge is the winery of Colonel Preston, a gentleman of wealth and fine tastes. He has 480 acres of choice hill land, more than half of which is well adapted for fruit trees and grapes. The finest grapes we ever tasted were in his vineyard. He has in store in his wine cellar 10,000 gallons of wine from 1 to 3 years old, and will make about 4,000 gallons this season, commencing work this week.
Although the Prestons sought to retire from active public life, Emily's believers continued to seek her out after the move. As written requests for aid poured in, she and Hartwell felt they could not ignore her divine gift to help relieve suffering. They constructed a 20-room hospital and boarding house close to their home to hold patients whose illnesses required special care and monitoring. The original cottage was turned into a workshop laboratory where she prepared her medicines. Attached to the other side of the cottage was another important building, the medicine house. This square, unadorned, 2-story building served as an apothecary, where she packaged her medicines for shipping and also sold them over the counter. Through word-of-mouth advertising, she developed a lucrative medicine business. Mail arrived from Washington, Oregon, and Nevada, but most came from closer towns scattered throughout Northern California. In 1879, she received 1,000 letters alone. Her patients included bank presidents, postal clerks, teachers, farmhands, sheriffs, millers, stockbrokers, shoemakers, editors, politicians, and others. The letters affected more than Mrs. Preston's heart and pocketbook, for although they arrived bearing a variety of designs, most greeted her with "Dear Madam," a title which soon came into standard usage for her as Madam Preston. One of the interesting features of the core of the property was the Preston Lake at 900 feet above sea level. It is one of the few natural mountain lakes in Sonoma County. It never goes dry, yet is not fed by a stream. It is an alluvial slide lake fed by springs. Core samples taken by the University of California indicate that it's at least 1,500 years old. In 1884, Hartwell built a 4-room summer cottage at the lake and, about a mile away, a large wood-framed gabled cottage which he called the Church of the Wildwood, built to seat 300 people. During summer, Emily's followers would move to England Camp, southwest of the lake, for 2 or 3 months of retreat, contemplative enjoyment, and prayer. She encouraged them to build their own cottages there, and if they couldn't afford to build their own, she would have a cottage built for them. Although the colony did not promote communal living and had no common dining hall, it afforded many opportunities for bringing people together. The campground a mile south of Preston Lake was where the Covenanters gathered during the summer months. An article in the Santa Rosa Daily Republican, dated June 10, 1895, describes the camp.
The camp is located in one of the loveliest spots in that picturesque region. The road winds in and out with an easy sinuosity that reminds one of the road to the geysers. When you come to the end of the road, you're at the camp, which is scattered over a number of prettily wooded acres on the mountainside. Only 100 yards from the entrance gate is the well with a force pump to drive water into the baths. No pleasanter drink comes from the earth than comes up from that well. It is reported that one day, Madam Preston went down to the spot where the well is, blessed the ground, and told the people to dig, promising that they should discover a splendid well. They dug, and the well was found.
Every summer, the Preston Covenanters would go into camp for 2 months. This summer period of spiritual renewal was a fundamental component of religious life at Oak Mountain. Many were so drawn to the Prestons and the restorative climate of Oak Mountain that they wanted to reside nearby. The earliest were single men who came for treatment and never left. Some of these patients felt that they owed Madam Preston their lives. One of the buildings which helped to start the community of Preston was the church built by such a patient, Frederick Hastings Rindge, in the spring of 1886. Frederick was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the only surviving son among the 6 children of Samuel Rindge and Clarissa Harrington. He entered Harvard College in 1875, but poor health forced him to drop out his senior year. He spent several years traveling through Europe and America, including a brief period as a Colorado sheep rancher. In 1883, he inherited his father's estate, then worth nearly $2 million from his investments in textile mills and landownings. In 1887, Mayor William Russell of Cambridge, a Harvard friend, requested Rindge's help in funding a new public library. Rindge responded in July of 1887 with an offer of land and full funding for Cambridge's public library. Later that year, he enlarged his offer to include additional buildings, a new city hall, and the Ringe Technical School. In appreciation of the cures which Madame Preston had given him, Frederick felt moved to provide her with a more appropriate place to promote her religion of inspiration. Built in the style of a New England meeting house, the clock tower was installed with a Seth Thomas 8-day clock to help the Preston followers to observe the passage of time. Punctuality was also very important to the Madam. The first meeting and dedication of the church took place on Sunday, September 19, 1886. Colonel Preston spoke to those gathered.
The religious churches are to a great extent discordant and inharmonious. There is no one which denies the inspiration of God, and theologians claim that God spoke to his people at one time, but has ceased to do so. Why couldn't God speak as well today to man as he could 2,000 years ago? Daniel prophesied in the sacred book, "When all shall see for themselves the beauties of God."
The church, situated among residential buildings on a terrace of the mountain, will become the most significant building of the community. Called the Free Pilgrims Covenant Church and the Covenant Meeting House by its members, it became the hub of community life. Stenciled on the inside walls were these words:
We worship the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. We go in secret and pray, and confess our sins, one and all. We meet together on Sundays and Thursdays for edification, when each in turn should lead, until we find our respective places in the Spirit. We are to live this religion everywhere, and especially in our homes. Otherwise, we are not of the covenant of God in heaven. This do we voluntarily do. Amen. Truth is our motto. Purity is our password into eternal life. I do this day give unto God this meeting house as one covenant to keep. And I invite you who wish to make a covenant with God to come and help me keep this covenant, and to place your name with mine. For strength and faith in this God we talk about, that he will bless us and take us into heaven.
Also built during this period was a railroad depot and a one-room schoolhouse where Emily herself taught the children for 6 years. At its peak in 1895, the Preston community existed on both sides of the Russian River. Madame Preston was also a well-known matchmaker, and she encouraged Frederick to stop by Brighton, Michigan on his way home to meet her niece, Rhoda May Knight. Within 2 weeks of meeting her, they were married. In 1891, they purchased the 13,000-acre Malibu Spanish land grant and would frequently visit Preston with their 3 children, Samuel, Frederick Jr., and Rhoda, although Frederick would continue to seek out the Madam's cures for the remainder of his life. The restorative benefits of the climate and the mineral springs were recognized and promoted at Preston. Julia Lewis, a patient from Petaluma, suffered from bouts of diphtheria, an acute and sometimes fatal disease. She lived at Preston for months at a time, her illness requiring the close care of the Madam. Mrs. Lewis wrote enthusiastically about her faith in her care at Preston and about the healing Preston waters in a letter home, dated 1886.
The spring water is helping me. It's making some wonderful cures with them that are drinking it. They all say it is helping them. I went up to the campgrounds this morning and filled my jugs. When I was going past Mrs. Preston's, she came out. She said she was glad I was using the water. She said it was helping me a great deal. I took a bath in it yesterday.
One of the things that I think of with hot springs, I'm a big fan of hot springs myself. And one of the ways that I think of that spring water, that natural spring water coming out of the earth, is that all the elements are there, It's like you have the earth is holding this water, and it's being heated from the core of the earth, that fire in the earth, and that air, those bubbles, that air is coming up. So the way I see those mineral springs, those hot springs, is there's this synergy of the elemental forces, the earth, the water, the air, and the fire that's present there. And according to alchemy, anytime we have those elemental forces come together in that way, it produces what they call the quintessence, that fifth element, which is that spiritual force. And I think a lot of people that sit in hot springs for a prolonged period of time can notice a certain adjustment in consciousness, right? That you start to feel very differently when you're immersed in water in that way. Not to mention just the importance of the minerals and the way in which the different minerals present within that water penetrate into the tissues of the body, have specific biochemical effects on the body, and how, you know, all across the world, anywhere there's hot water being contained by the earth naturally, these are always considered to be very sacred places. They're spiritual places, but also very healing places.
Emily encouraged musical abilities, even hiring a music teacher from Healdsburg to give lessons 2 days a week. Group singing was a major part of all church services. The school, too, had a music program. If a child couldn't afford an instrument, Emily made sure he or she got one. One of the early newspaper reporters visiting Preston described walking up the road and hearing different music coming out of every house. Eventually, the settlement had both a community orchestra and a women's orchestra. Each gave regular concerts in the church and special concerts on holidays. Emily's importance in the community is illustrated by an episode that occurred one day when she was embarking on a trip to the flat she kept in San Francisco. Mary Mowbray wrote about the incident.
I'll recollect she came down to the station one morning and discovered that she didn't have the key to her flat. She sent Joseph Zahner, her coachman, back to her house to get the key. In the meantime, the train pulled into the station, and she told the conductor about the key. He held the train until Joseph came back with her key. Holding the train was something unusual, and they never held a train for anyone but the man.
Emily was the main employer at Preston, since she owned all the enterprises in town. She employed men and women to cook, clean, and care for the sick and labor on the ranch. The female hired help lived with her in the mansion. The men lived in the bunkhouse over the wine cellar across the lane. The madam had a bell on top of her house that rang as regular as clockwork. Mary Mowbray remembers,
When that bell rang for mealtime, all the men dropped their work and rushed to the house for their meals. She believed in early to bed and early to rise. When any of her help stayed out after 8 o'clock in the evening, they were locked out.
She had a good system. I mean, she saw to the wants and needs of the community, and people seemed to be pretty happy here. I mean, they didn't need a jail, which is nice. And she had certain rules. She didn't really approve of dancing, and she didn't approve of card playing. She was very much against pernicious gossip. The first time you were caught engaging in pernicious gossip, she would take you aside and tell you don't do it. The second time, she would tell you don't do it in front of everyone. And the third time, that was it. 3 strikes, you're out. So, and I think that was probably a good rule.
in 1875, the Preston property consisted of 160 acres. In the spring of 1887, Hartwell Preston transferred the titles of all his properties to his wife. When he died in 1889, his holdings had grown to almost 1,500 acres. In the Santa Rosa Daily Democrat, December 14th, 1889.
H.L. Preston, a highly respected citizen of Cloverdale, died Thursday morning. He was known all over the coast as a politician and jurist, but on his marrying Miss Preston, whose fame is worldwide, he retired from active life with his wife on Oak Mountain. He had reached the age of 69.
Madam Preston continued to purchase property in the area for over 15 years. In 1898, when asked to estimate the extent of her holdings, the madam claimed that she hadn't the faintest idea of how many acres they comprised, as she had never counted them up. If she had, it would have totaled 2,378 acres. Invalids, not tourists, flocked to Preston. Madame Preston concocted her own medicines and ointments, and devoted the majority of her time to treating the sick. Herbs and roots gathered on the property were mixed with store-bought ingredients like cream of tartar and bromide potassium. Her cures combined faith, exercise, spring water, and medicinal spirits. The Madame's practice flourished within the unregulated context of medicine in America in the late 19th century. In California, until 1900, the practice of medicine was open to anyone, subject only to liability for damages in a case of the lack of skill on the part of the practitioner. It was not a crime to treat the sick with their consent and with honest intention. This was how Madame Preston was able to diagnose illnesses through the mail and prescribe her own homemade medicines to patients without benefit of formal medical training or license, yet remain within the law. The Madame never called on any of her patients. They had to call on her. According to Preston resident Nathan Bowers,
Mondays were set aside as reception days, and many and varied were the cases which came for treatment. When a new patient appeared in the room set aside for the office, he was met cordially, given a small glass of her own concoction, mostly port wine, and made to feel comfortable. The Madame sat opposite him and looked fixedly at him for several minutes. No word was spoken. The patient, in recounting his experience, always admitted he felt as if she were looking right through him. Presently, Madame would tell the visitor what she thought his illness was. Then she would tell him what to do, what medicine was needed, and how to use it. In an amazing number of cases, she effected cures, startling cures, where often the celebrated physicians of those days had failed to give relief.
Perhaps the main treatment that separated Madame Preston from other practitioners in the area was her blister treatment, or liniment oil. The liniment, or paint as it was sometimes called, consisted of turpentine mixed with saltpeter and possibly some vinegar and egg. Sometimes it appeared and smelled like iodine. Users would apply the liniment to their bodies over the particular area of distress, cover the spot with a pad made from oiled silk, and wait for the resultant ulceration of the skin. The festering sore required 2 to 4 weeks of suppuration, according to the patient's strength and nerve. Since the Madame knew what effects to expect from her blistering treatment, she attempted to describe them in her instructional pamphlet.
When making sores on the body, you are apt to feel very nervous and are liable to be feverish and to have cold chills running through the body, and in fact, to feel worse for a time than before you had any sores. These feelings are caused by the disease coming to the surface. The liniment penetrates the skin and draws the impurities of the body to the surface.
Yet the effects of the Madame's medicine did cause alarm, particularly when patients suffered side effects which precluded them from walking, with their eyes becoming severely sensitive to light, inflamed, misted over, or swelled shut. One patient described the effect in a letter to the Madame.
Saturday, I put on that liniment and oilcloth on my legs. Sunday it began to burn, feel hot. Felt as if there was sand on the oilcloth. I took it off, wiped off the scales twice a day. Tuesday, took it all off. Couldn't stand it no longer.
Madame Preston's liniment appears to have been a typical blistering agent. Some of her patients believed so strongly in the merits of the blister treatment that they were rarely without one or more running sores somewhere on their body. The prevalence of the blister treatment at Preston led disparaging neighbors to dub Emily Preston the Blister Lady, and Preston Blisterville.
My husband and his mother had a lot of faith in the treatment. They were like the rest of the Prestonites. They thought it was the only treatment for all ills. As for myself, I didn't want any of it. I often wondered how these people could stand them. Some of the people I knew had a blister on all the time. I knew one woman that could not live unless she had a blister somewhere on her body. Of course, it got to be a habit with some people. I do know the treatment helped a lot of the hopeless cases.
Besides liniment, the list of available medicines included fever paste, gin and garlic, a cough medicine, a blood medicine, wine cordial, and wine bitters.
Wine and alcohol really go all the way back to ancient Egypt. It's been a traditional part of extracting plant medicines for a very long time. On the one hand, because they're preserved, alcohol is an excellent preservative, but alcohol has a unique affinity for drawing out the medicinal properties of plants. And this action of bitters is reaching far beyond just the digestive system and the liver and having full systemic effects. We're seeing that the bitter flavor actually can be supportive in reducing high levels of cholesterol, the way that they can facilitate in cleaning out the blood vessels, the way that they can help to strengthen the heart, the way in which they can calm the nervous system down. It's very common in medicinal plants that have a bitter flavor to also be nervous system sedatives, right? So we see a whole spectrum of plants that we refer to as bitter nervines, and these are plants that have that very strong bitter taste, but also kind of bring our energy down, right? They have this calming and kind of sedative effect upon the nervous system.
Despite the discomfort, hundreds of people trusted and followed Madame Preston's medical advice. Though she cultivated this influence, she did not claim to be infallible. Sometimes she even recommended for her patients to see another doctor, as Julie Lewis wrote.
Last Thursday night, the madam said she did not see how I could live through it, but said that she would do all she could for me, and I believe she saved my life. She wanted me to call another doctor. She said she would not feel hurt at all. I told her that if I had to die, I was willing to die in her hands, that I was satisfied with what she was doing, and that if anyone on earth could help me, she could.
On March 5, 1888, the medical gentlemen of Sonoma County assembled in Santa Rosa for the purpose of organizing a county medical society and ridding the county of unlicensed practitioners. Very soon afterward, Madame Preston's unregistered practice attracted the attention of the State Board of Medical Examiners. Her playful response to their stern admonition reflects the security that she felt in knowing that her practice was within the limits of the law.
Dear Sir, your favor of 22nd last is duly at hand and the contents noted, but you are wrong informed about me. I am not engaged in the practice of medicine at Cloverdale. In fact, I do not live there at all, but reside some miles away in the mountains, and do not profess to be a physician at all. But your kind and flattering letter has put an idea into my perhaps already too ambitious mind. It is that possibility I have the making of a doctor after all. The efficiency of the profession must be raised. Why, just think of it. Even these mountains are alive with poor wretches of both sexes, whom you've turned out of your offices and sanitariums to die upon their legs. And they so beset my doors and gates, crying for aid and begging for the hope of life, that I can hardly find time to cook my old man's victuals or wash his clothes. Poor things, they all tell the same story, and almost breaks my heart. The doctors, they used their little morphine syringes upon me and deadened my pain, until they got all my money, and then turned me out to go to the springs. It is dreadful, doctor, and we must try to cure them, some of them at least. Yours sincerely, Mrs. E. Preston.
As Madame Preston's medical practice flourished, so did her spiritual influence on people. Just as she was independent and absolute in her medical practice, so was she free and uninhibited in her spiritual leadership.
Every good thought is a prayer. You do not have to kneel down here and say over a lot of words and tell God what to do. God knows better than you or I. What is the use of kneeling down and praying? Stand up and pray every way. It is not our words but our acts. How much does your everyday life show of heaven? That is the principle that we are trying to fill, so as to get an understanding, to know God for ourselves and not from another. What the past of anyone has been, never mind. I come up to you in the present, as God has made you tonight. Some of our young people sit out under the window and think no more of their souls than they do of a brick, and they are not sitting here and getting communion on them, but no. Sit out there and look in at the window. You can't sit outside and look in at the window of heaven. I am determined to stand here and read the words, and no matter what the people think of me. There are some here who think I am a little crazy. They do not believe in it, but I am not so crazy, but I can read the words. When you that do not believe in this or any religion, let me ask you, what have you got that is any better? Are you happy? You see that we are happy and contented, and you must admit that we are prosperous. So then, it must be good. We volunteer to serve him this way. Take the second thought. Do as we would like to be done by. Confess our mistakes to God till he gives us his love, so we will not be afraid to die.
She eventually published a book entitled The Hell and the Heaven. The audience reception varied.
She said, "It's the worst book I ever read. Nobody but an illiterate person would write a book like that." Now this woman didn't know the madam. Of course, I didn't care for the book. It was all religion. In fact, there was too much religion for me. However, the madam thought it was all right.
In 1903, Emily placed copies of the book, together with her medical brochure, in the Sonoma County Library and the Library of Congress. She clearly did not want her religion or her medical practice to be forgotten. On the morning of January 22, 1909, Madam Preston was washing dishes in the kitchen. Suddenly she suffered from a major heart attack and fell to the floor.
I'll never forget the 22nd day of January, 1909, when word went round that Madam Preston dropped dead in her kitchen. All the people were shocked. Her followers just couldn't believe it. No, that couldn't happen to their great leader. They couldn't understand why that had happened to the great madam. I really believe that all those people thought she was immortal, and her passing was a great shock to them.
Emily left as a will a testamentary document which bequeathed her entire estate to her church.
A testamentary paper found in the desk of the late Madam Preston, founder of the Free Pilgrims Covenant Church, was filed in the Superior Court yesterday. Madam Preston was a member of the Lathrop family, and there are a number of heirs of the Lathrop family. She directs that if they claim anything of her estate, they are to be given the sum of $1.
But the testamentary paper had no date and was not witnessed. It was contested by her relatives and subsequently dismissed in court as improper. The judge appointed Emily's nieces, Augusta Knight Green and May Knight Ringe, as administrators of the estate. In October 1911, they placed it up for sale to the highest bidder. The price of the 1,430-acre property quickly rose to $19,000. It was purchased by Frederick and May Ringe's 16-year-old daughter, Rhoda Agatha Ringe of Santa Monica, a grandniece of Emily and already a mature and wealthy businesswoman. Rhoda Ringe never lived at Preston and never profited from the purchase. Presiding over the ranch as an absentee landlord, she paid Joseph Sonner to continue to maintain the property as ranch foreman. Frederick Ringe had died in 1905, leaving May Ringe in charge of the Rancho Malibu, 3 children, and all of his business interests. Fiercely devoted to her husband, May Ringe found an inner strength that would help her carry on the battle for the right to maintain her private property, no matter the cost. She began putting high wire fences with chain gates around her ranch and hired mounted, armed guards to patrol the property day and night. May wanted most of all to be left alone to run her ranch in peace, but it was not to be. The press labeled her the Queen of Malibu. In 1904, the Southern Pacific Railroad applied to build tracks linking the Long Wharf in Santa Monica with their northern tracks at Santa Barbara. The connection proposed was a straight line right through the Malibu Ranch. A loophole existed in the law which prevented condemning a right-of-way parallel to an already existing railroad, so the Ringes decided to build their own private railroad through the ranch to keep Southern Pacific out. May carried on with the plan and built 15 miles of standard gauge tracks which would ultimately lead to nowhere. But it bought her some time. She would continue to fight on other grounds and to resist any start of construction. When state highway employees arrived to begin work, they were met at the Las Flores gate by 40 of Mrs. Ringe's armed guards on horseback who kept the work crew off the ranch for 3 days. The state eventually was awarded title to the right-of-way through the Malibu Ranch in 1925. Finding herself land-rich and cash-poor, she began to search the ranch for oil, but instead found large deposits of clay. The Spanish colonial revival architectural style was popular in Los Angeles, putting decorative tile in high demand. May Ringe founded Malibu Potteries in 1926 on the beach in Malibu. She imported ancient designs from Spain, hired ceramicist Rufus Keeler to formulate glazes of incredible hues, and her tiles would become known all over the world for their beauty and quality. In 1930, Rhoda Ringe, now the wife of Merritt Adamson, had Styles O. Clements built a summer home near the original family home in Malibu Canyon. It has been called the Taj Mahal of tile due to its extensive use of decorative ceramic tiles created by Malibu Potteries, including a 674-piece Persian rug made of tile. One can see in every detail and design the incredible craft and thought that went into the building of the house. It's fascinating to wonder, would this beautiful house have come into existence at all if not for the matchmaking efforts of Emily Preston, introducing Frederick and May some 40 years earlier? Without the madam's pivotal leadership, her community gradually diminished. By the early 1940s, trains no longer stopped at Preston Depot. The post office closed in 1941, and the coaling bottling works in 1943. These events marked the end of the town of Preston. Hard times hit Malibu as well. During the Great Depression, many of May Ringe's business ventures failed and losses accumulated on the once prosperous Malibu Ranch. The Malibu Potteries building east of the pier burned in 1931 and was never rebuilt. When May Ringe died on February 8, 1941, at the age of 76, her unfinished 50-room castle, along with 26 acres of land and thousands of tiles, were sold in 1942 to the Franciscan Order for $50,000. On March 12, 1941, the Los Angeles Times reported the death of May Ringe and the abruptness of her will, written entirely by hand.
In the name of God, Amen. I, May Knight Ringe, being of sound mind, wish to dispose of my property in the following manner, if I have anything left. And to all others who would lay claim to my property, I give $1.
The Preston estate remained largely intact until 1943, when Fred and Eugenia Oster bought the remaining 1,430 acres in order to open a boys' school and camp. They found the mansion virtually undisturbed since Emily's death. A revealing article from the Santa Rosa Press-Democrat in 1938 by Veronica Ives gives a glimpse into the state of affairs of the property at this time.
We pushed open the gate and walked through the ruined garden. The house is white and colonial-looking, with a porch clear around it and dark green trimmings. It looks as if it died long ago. Everywhere leaves and debris and loneliness. Quite a change, we thought, from the bustle that had been here once. The starched maids scurrying, the English noblewomen come here to cure their lungs, and Mrs. Preston playing on the organ. And now, all quiet, all fallen away. Nothing left but ghostly shuttered house, the century plants, and the wind in the eucalyptus. After a while, an old fairy story sort of man came out of one of the houses to meet us. He had a chuckle and no teeth. Did I know Mrs. Preston? I was her chauffeur. The old man told us his name was Joseph Zahner and that he was 79. Before leaving, we asked him, "How on earth did you ever clean this enormous house?" I locked the door and put the key away.
The Osters operated a working sheep ranch on the property and a boys' camp during the summer months. The camp ended shortly after Fred Oster's death in 1947. but the family continued to raise sheep as the ranch's primary source of income. In December 1967, Eugenia Oster sold the Preston Ranch to Dr. Russell Lee, who bought the land with 4 partners for $189,000. It was Dr. Lee's purchase of the Preston property that allowed for the eventual influx of artists from the Renaissance Fair to Oak Mountain. Ernie Fitchbach was one of the first musicians to arrive.
We'd sneak up and we'd walk up into the mountains and hike around up there, and it was really beautiful. That's what I liked, and that's when we discovered the church, and I was horrified because it was being vandalized pretty badly. It was getting graffiti, and the windows were getting smashed out, and there were beer cans, and people were kind of wrecking it. It was like an abandoned building, which was really not cool. Until we met Dr. Lee, because my friend wanted to get married there. And he actually came up, went into the church with us and asked us, "Do you believe in what she said?" And my friend Clark said, "Yes, we do." He said, "Okay, you can get married here." And I said, "This place is getting pretty badly vandalized. Shouldn't we take care of it?" He said, "You want to take care of it? Go ahead, take care of it." That's when we started taking care of the church in Cloverdale.
The first Renaissance Fair took place in Southern California in 1963 in the backyard of Phyllis and Ron Patterson. It would eventually move to other venues and grow to include tens of thousands of visitors yearly. Many countercultural norms which people would come to associate with the 60s, including communalism, anti-modernism, craft making, as well as a folk music revival, all played a part in the fair and influenced the people who were intimately associated with it. This then was the domain of many of the artists and musicians who made their homes at Preston. They were the pipers and revelers, the jesters and dancers and craft people who made the fair happen. A scene of world music developed on the mountain. A barrage of talent found its way through the ranch. At certain times you could walk down the road and hear a different genre of world music coming out of every house.
Sometimes if, say, Thanksgiving or something, we would just have different musicians there. So there'd be Irish music in one little house and maybe English music in another because the Morris dancers were around. Well, I loved the living room. We had a giant double living room, and Ernie had hung all his butterflies there. And we had grand parties in there with musicians and dancers, all kinds of wonderful people. Paco de Lucia even came there and played one time in our living room. The music and the dance was what made it for me.
The artist colony had no dominating central figure like Madame Preston. There was, however, a leading inspirational figure, Bob Thomas.
I used to stand behind him and watch him make bagpipes, watch him do his illustrations. He did the illustration for the Grateful Dead. He did the Steely Head.
Robert was very interesting gentleman. I call him a true Renaissance man. He could paint, he could draw, he could play bagpipes, he could make bagpipes, he could tune and play almost anything. I remember him very often while Wendy and I cooked breakfast, he would be playing the lute.
He did several of the Grateful Dead's album covers. He did a lot of beautiful paintings. He also, when he moved to London for a while, he went around to all the museums and he discovered that a lot of the bagpipes that they had, they no longer used in England. They'd become obsolete because of the accordion. Nobody played them anymore. He was able to go and they would take them out and let him look at them and measure them. And he started reproducing them, and now they're actually being played again in London.
The original Golden Toad was an outgrowth of the Renaissance Fair band. The fair was only open at certain times, such as several weekends in the summer, so the Golden Toad provided Bob Thomas and his bandmates a chance to continue playing their music outside the confines of the fair. The Golden Toad had no albums, and at their best received performances at Marin Renaissance fairs, most of their listeners would have had no idea who was performing. Thus it would seem that the golden toad should have disappeared into the mists of time, and yet that is not the case. The golden toad seemed to have been very influential on other musicians, so like all such bands, their legacy after their demise is greater than when they existed. Whatever they might be called, when Dr. Lee, the owner of the ranch, came to know this band of traveling artists, it struck a note with him. They weren't just vagabonds, they were dedicated artisans and musicians. He became a patron and gave them the ranch as their home for as long as he lived. The character of the mountain changed suddenly and radically in 1988 when a huge storm caused a downed power line to start a fire in the middle of the night, destroying many of the historical buildings.
We just finished doing about 5 years of restoration on the mansion, had the roof fixed and ready for the foundation and all the wiring and the plastering, and then it was gone, poof. But nobody lost their lives, and that was amazing, because it was a firestorm. And that was kind of the end of our community. Well, it wasn't kind of the end, it was the end.
We were already here in Ukiah Valley. Just great empathy with everyone. Bob Thomas lost ivory bagpipes that were irreplaceable. He was not there. He and Mary were, I think, at a Renaissance fair when the place burned down. I remember Katana and Ed were in the mansion at that point, and Katana had just had Solomon make her some shoes, and she didn't get out with her shoes. Ed got out with his camera, and that was about it. They got out with their lives. And yeah, very scary, very sad. And yeah, the fire was devastating to us all.
It was very depressing that the buildings all burned down to me, because they were beautiful buildings. However, when I went up there after they'd burned down, it felt actually wonderful. Like, it seemed like while we were living there, there was all kinds of strange interactions, along with the wonderful things that happened, but there was a lot of weird stuff that happened there. But when that burned, it cleared away anything Madam Preston had ever done to the Indians. Who knows what her real relationship was to them, because it was apparently a sacred site for the Pomo Indians where they did their ceremonies, right where she built her mansion. I'm certain they didn't like that. So when it was gone, I walked up there and I stood there and I went, wow, this feels great. Even though the mansion was gone, which was a wonderful thing. It's a shame that it went, but there it is.
Longtime resident and musician Lisa Ellis, devastated by the losses, stopped by Preston's surviving church and casually opened an old copy of Emily's Book of Sermons. There, on a randomly selected page, were words spoken by the madam 100 years earlier.
The world is kind of going downhill. Now they have the mobiles, and they will go faster yet. That will finish them up, and the last thing will be that electricity will set the world on fire and burn us up someday. That is the program.
One of the keys to appreciating local history is being able to go to these places where, through a bit of imaginary time travel, we can grasp the scope of the generations that built on and preserved the land. Learning about local history helps younger generations to understand how they're part of something much larger than themselves.
This land is special. We found the springs. We traipsed all over this property, and I find that the energy here is really remarkable. The water is incredible. The location is spectacular. The Pomo felt that this was very important land. Their trade routes kind of centered around this area as one of the junction points of the trade routes.
Having survived the fire, the Preston Church was eventually designated a Sonoma County landmark. A Preston Historical Research and Restoration Fund was subsequently created to preserve the memory of the town of Preston and its people, and to help maintain the structural integrity of the church. You can experience the incredible array of letters written to Madame Preston at the Healdsburg Museum. Several thousand receipts, artifacts, and other documents are available for viewing. These letters give you a deeper understanding of the history of medicine and life in the late 19th century. Seeing the handwriting and signatures of these patients puts into perspective the individual human element of the letters.
To me, herbal medicine is what we need to be returning to for our own health and well-being. To me, people are starting to understand that pharmaceutical medicines are not the only option, that oftentimes they don't fix the problem, and that people are looking for more holistic means of healing themselves, more natural means of healing themselves. And to me, the Botanical Kingdom provides all of the medicines that we require to heal ourselves. You know, they say that for every sickness that there is on the earth, there is a medicine that grows on this earth to heal that sickness. And to me, moving forward, it requires us to realign ourselves with those natural forms of medicine so that we can regain that health and vitality and again, having that connection to the natural world.
The current caretakers of the ranch are safeguarding the surviving buildings, maintaining fire breaks, and keeping the Seth Thomas 8-day wind-up clock wound and the bell ringing on the hour.